There are times in both carpentry and woodworking where you're going to need to cut really steep angles. So in today's video, we're going to learn how to figure out those angles and then learn how to cut them on a miter saw using a simple homemade jig. Because steep angles show up in both carpentry and woodworking, in this video we're going to show examples of each of those. Plus, by the end of the video, you're going to be able to use all the skills that you've learned to build a unique but simple shelf. The first step is to find a tool to help you quickly solve for the various angles that you're going to be working with. And one of the best tools for that job is an angle finder. There are plenty to choose from, some of course more expensive than others. This one here is from Trend Tools. This is their larger version, which has these really long blades, which makes it very useful for what we're doing today. With this tool, you can find or copy angles, or you can make up your own. And those are the two methods that we're going to be looking at today when it comes to finding angles. With that, let's start by looking at the first method, which is how to find or copy an angle. In the carpentry world, one of the most common places to find steep angles is in stairs. For example, at the top of the staircase, there are two pieces of trim that come together to form a steep angle. What I'd like to do is install new pieces of flat trim here and here and use a separate piece of base cap molding to tie the two together. And it's this base cap that's going to require a steep miter cut. Okay, so let's look at how to find that angle so we can copy it over on the miter saw. The first thing to do is to zero out the angle finder, and for that all you have to do is put the two blades together and click the 0 button. Now work the gauge up into the existing angle, making sure that both blades are tight against each side. It looks like it's coming in at around 42.5 degrees. Now a common mistake here would be to simply split that angle in half and head off to the miter saw and cut two pieces at 21 degrees. But here is what two pieces at 21 degrees would look like. On the other hand, the correct way to calculate this would be to take 180 degrees minus the 42.5 degrees to get the complementary angle of 137.5 degrees. Now if you take 137.5 and divide that by 2, you get the angle setting for the miter saw, which is 68.75 degrees. In a similar way, if you want to duplicate an angle with this tool, you simply zero it out and then line up the blades on that existing project. Here for this project, the angle comes out to be about 50 degrees, which means 180 degrees minus our 50 degrees equals 130 degrees. Divide that then by 2, and that gives us our miter angle of 65 degrees. But wait a minute, most miter saws don't cut beyond 50 degrees, so how do you make that cut? Well, that's where the use of a jig comes into play. But before we look at that, let's look at the second method, which is how to come up with your own angles. One of my subscribers reached out to me because he saw this project somewhere online and was wondering how to figure and how to cut for these steep angles. Because I didn't have any plans or dimensions to go by, I had to figure it out for myself, and here's how I did that. I started by taking 4 pieces of 1/2 inch or 12.7 millimeter thick by 2.5 inches or 63.5 millimeter wide stock and laying them sort of haphazardly out until I found something that sort of resembled the example project. Then to find the first angle, I simply used the angle rule to determine the first angle, and in this case I decided to go with 50 degrees. I then traced out the top and bottom of the piece with a pencil and then measured down from the bottom line 5 7/8 or 155 millimeters and drew a pencil line. What the parallel lines do is it allows you to continue to lay out the pieces so that when you're done and everything's assembled, the top of the shelf will be sitting level and not slanted, unless that's what you're going for. From there I transferred my 50-degree angle to the board below using the rule and continued adjusting, measuring with the gauge, making the angles, and drawing until I had everything laid out. Now that all the angles are found, let's do the math. The first 3 numbers are calculated as we did with the stair trim by subtracting them from 180 degrees and then dividing by 2. This angle, as you already know, is a 50-degree angle, and once we do the math, it works out to be a 65-degree angle on the saw. The next angle down here is 65 degrees, and after working out the math for this one, this turns out to be 57.5 degrees. And the last one is easy here because it's a 90-degree angle, which means that it's going to be a simple 45-degree cut on the saw. This angle down here worked out to be 25.5 degrees. And because this piece is just ending flat to the line with no miter, you simply need to subtract 25.5 from 90 degrees, which is 64.5 degrees. And that's the angle that needs to be set on the miter saw. Okay, so now that you know how to find or make up your own angles, you know how to do the math, let's go ahead and look at how to make the jig so you can cut those angles. So this is the jig we're building. Both the right and the left are identical. So once you make one, all you have to do is make a mirrored copy. Each saw may require the need to make some adjustments to the size or the style of this jig, but the main design should work for the majority of miter saws. Both the right and the left jigs are made from one piece of 3/4 inch or 19 millimeter thick finished plywood. That's cut down to 8 inches by 25 inches or 20.3 centimeters by 63.5 centimeters. I'm going to be using my miter saw to make all of my cuts, but if you can't for some reason, you need to use another saw, just make sure that all of your cuts are as accurate as possible. With the plywood laying on the saw like this, measure from the right side in 11 inches or 28 centimeters and make a mark. Swing the saw to the right 45 degrees, or if you're using a different sawing method, lay out a 45-degree cut just to the right side of that 11-inch mark and make your cut. Now take the cutoff piece and spin it around and put it on top of the other one. Line up the two pieces and draw a pencil line on the left side, laying out what is an exact copy. With that marked out, don't make the cut just yet, but rather spin the piece around and start cutting your 1.5 or 38 millimeter pieces that will make up the rest of the jig parts. And you may be wondering why I'm showing it to you this way, and it's simply for safety reasons. If you make your big 45-degree cut first, you're going to be left holding smaller pieces of wood, which are going to be decreasing as you cut the remaining parts of the jig. This jig requires that you cut 6 1.5 pieces, so let's do that now. Once that's done, you can set up to trim off the remaining material to make the exact copy of the 45-degree piece. I do want to quickly mention that after I cut this piece, we have about 1 3/8 inches left remaining, and I put that material in there for extra just in case you made some mistakes here or in the cut. So if you're confident with your cutting skills, you can actually get away with a sheet that's 24 inches and not 25 inches, which might make it easier when you go to purchase it at the store. The two back support pieces stay full length and get a simple 45-degree chamfer on each end, while the other two front support pieces get cut down to 7 inches or 18 centimeters in length, and they both get chamfers on either end. The last two pieces get a 45-degree angle and cut to a total length of 4 3/4 or 12 centimeters. With the glue and screws, start to install each support piece. The back gets installed flush with the sides. The front pieces here get installed about 1 inch in or 25 millimeters in, and the two bottom supports get installed flush to the end. And the rest of the material overhangs, creating a little support shelf. Once everything is dry, sand down the sharp edges. With those built, let's install them on the saw. I like to keep them both about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters away from the blade, and I use clamps to hold them into position. Truth be told, all the cuts that we're going to make today, except for the stair trim parts, can be done with just one side of the jig. But because I want to demonstrate two reasons why it might be helpful to have both, I'm going to keep them in place for now. The first reason to have them both is for handedness. I'm not sure what your dominant hand is, but because I'm right-handed, I like to work with the jig on the left. If you've built both jigs, you can now choose what's more comfortable for you or what works best for your saw. The other reason why it's sometimes helpful is because it provides a stop for your material. Here you can see if I slide a piece up the left, the right side of the jig actually stops the piece from continuing on. However, sometimes that can actually interfere with particular cuts, and I'll show you that later on. If I remove the other side now, let me bring your attention to two different ways to hold the workpiece into position. First, you can simply wrap your hand over the support here, making sure, of course, that your hand is free and clear of the blade before making the cut. However, sometimes if the cut is really steep, keeping your hand there can be dangerous. In those situations, you can exchange your hand for a clamp. That way you are safe and your workpiece can be held securely into position. Okay, with that all covered, let's look at how to set the miter saw to the correct angles. With the jig in place and the miter saw set to 0, if we were to slide a piece in place and make a cut, that cut would have a 45-degree miter or bevel on it because the jig is holding the board at 45 degrees. In other words, with the saw set to 0, it makes a 45-degree cut. Now, as soon as we move the saw over, say to 10 degrees, we would now actually be cutting a 55-degree angle. With that, let's look at how to cut this 50-degree angle on our little shelf project. If you remember our math, we took 180 degrees minus 50 degrees to get 130. Then we divided that in half to get our miter angle, which was 65 degrees. Therefore, 65 degrees minus 45 degrees, again because that's the starting point of our jig, leaves us with 20 degrees. So on the saw, we start at 0, which again is 45 degrees, and then we move the saw over to 20 degrees and lock it in place. Use a clamp to hold the work in place and then make the cut. At this point, it's really good to go ahead and check that the cut is square. If it's not, most of the time it can be corrected by simply adjusting the bevel of the saw ever so slightly. With the cut verified to be square, let's cut it to length, which is around 16 3/4 of an inch or 42.5 centimeters. The next piece starts with the same angle on this end, but on the other end, the angle is 65 degrees. Which means that once we do our math, it works out to be a 57.5 degree angle on the saw. With a piece marked to length, which is 8 3/8 or 21.3 centimeters, from long point to long point on my drawing, insert it correctly in the saw and make the cut. As you can see, this is where not having the other jig installed helps because you can pass the work through to make the cut. Moving on, the next piece length is about 6 3/8 or 16.2 centimeters, from short point of the miter to the long point of the other miter. And because this angle is 90 degrees, all we have to do to make the cut is to turn the saw back to 0 and make the cut. The last piece of my drawing is about 13 5/8 or 34.6 centimeters from long point to long point. On this end, of course, a matching 45-degree cut, but on the other end down here, the saw needs to be set to 64.5 degrees. As a reminder, the math at this end is different because it ends on a flat and is not mitering with another piece. Once you have all the pieces cut, it's a really good idea to go ahead and dry fit those all together before you add any glue. I personally find it helpful to add some tape to the miters and then add the glue and use some clamps or other methods to hold the 3 bottom pieces while the glue dries. Once that glue is dried, I then prepare and glue the top piece in place. A little bit of glue removal and some sanding and it's ready for your finish of choice. Again, the numbers that I'm showing you are based off the drawing I made. So just know that if you go ahead and start to build this project, your numbers might turn out to be a little bit different depending on how you draw it. And last but not least, if you remember back to the beginning of the video when we were working on the stair trim parts, we still need to cut that 68.75 degree angle on the miter saw, and we can now do that because we already made the jigs. With the miter saw adjusted to 23.75 degrees, hold the work pieces in place and make both cuts using each side of the jig. As you can see, this method works great for both carpentry and woodworking. I do have to mention that this jig might not work on every single saw or for every single project, but now that you know the basics, I bet you can come up with one that works great for your specific needs. If you have any questions, need specific help, or would like to share some photos with me, the best place to do that is on Instagram. So if you're on there, go ahead and find me at Training Hands Academy. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.